don't know when the Supreme Court will rule. You might have seen circulated already a draft opinion that is a fully draft opinion that has no law yet. That is just something that actually whoever released that should not have released, but it does give us some writing on the wall as to where the court is probably going. And the Supreme Court, which usually doesn't issue decisions on Fridays, has added Friday tomorrow as a date that they are going to be issuing decisions. There's other decisions are outstanding, so we don't know when the case will come down, but it could be as early as tomorrow, and it will definitely be by the end of June, because that is when they wrap up their term. So for our first talking point is, how will Washington residents, because of course we do want to know how it impacts us, how will we be impacted by this decision? And want to see who wants to take that on first. I'll see who comes off unmute. I think that's April.
So just because I will tell you, we've put a lot of thought into that as we went through our last legislative session. And frankly, reproductive healthcare, reproductive rights, reproductive justice is always at the forefront when we're talking about healthcare each and every session. I will tell you what's going to happen potentially if this decision comes down the way we think it will, is that we're going to be crowded. We're going to have a lot of women and transgender men seeking refuge in our state to get the health care they need and deserve. We have put that lens and focus on the work we did last session as we pass bills to increase, frankly, the capacity for some of our healthcare workers that are going to be on the front lines of this influx in terms of their scope of practice. And in terms of funding mechanisms that will allow clinics to operate. And frankly, we've seen a lot of our partners who are doing really good work in healthcare, in reproductive healthcare, where they're girding up on our border so that they can provide the care to folks who are coming across the border, and they don't have to come all the way to, let's say, Seattle or to Everett to get that care. They can get it as quickly as they need it in a place that's close to a border with maybe a state like Idaho that is doing some stuff that's going to impede people's rights to basic health care. So what we're doing is getting ready for an influx.
Yeah, I've heard numbers upwards of 300% increases in the demand for abortions here, as people who are essentially healthcare refugees from other states coming here to access basic life-saving care. And I guess part of what I really think about too is part of my story is that I have a friend who was told from a very young age that she would die if she ever gave birth. She could not carry a pregnancy to term without giving up her own life, and it wouldn't get to term at that point. So I don't know a single form of birth control that is 100%. And so it is, I literally, there's every single form. I know somebody for whom it's failed. And when it failed for her, she needed it. And if she had lived in one of these states that's trying to restrict it, I would have helped her come here and making sure that there was an appointment available, because I think that's really what we're thinking about now is a 300% increase in volume and demand means it may be a really long time before people can get appointments. And if their health is on the line, that means that we're putting people in danger.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of add as well that we're still in the middle of a COVID era. And so, we have to remember as well that our healthcare workers are already under a lot of pressure and stress. So doing everything that we can to make sure that workers' protections are in place right now, especially, is important. Not just obviously for COVID reasons, but for this as well. And just seeing that increase. And then I think, the second part of that too is oftentimes with situations like this, it tends to fall on the backs of those who are volunteering their time and organizations that are all volunteer based. And, I, for one, would really love to see, what this next session holds in finding some systemic manners to prepare for, individuals that are coming over and needing our help, and just to see what's in our wheelhouse of what we can do to prepare for that. And be kind of a leader as a state in our country for providing care for these individuals.
And one thing I wanted to mention, sorry, I don't want to interrupt Summer, but Melissa made a really good point about that 300% increase. The places where women are seeking healthcare provide more than just abortions. And so some of the stories that I've heard constituents talk about is that they're getting their basic healthcare needs, their basic annual checks at facilities that also provide abortion, because abortion care is healthcare. And what's happening now is that wait time, right? So you want to go in for some type of checkup, or maybe it's your annual visit. Now you're having to wait longer. And this is before we see that real spike in uptake. So that's another thing that as a state, we're going to have to address, is that you're going to have women across our state who aren't going to be able to get basic any healthcare because we've got clinics that are overwhelmed with, again, Melissa, sorry to keep saying, but healthcare refugees, I wrote that down when you said it, because that is literally what we are preparing for.
And like so many other types of healthcare, when it's hard to get healthcare, you have to wait, or there's an appointment, but the appointment is far away. The people who can often get the appointment or get to the appointment are the people who have transportation or have a flexible job or are able to take the time off. And so again, it does not fall the same on all women and transgender men. It does, it hits those who are most impacted even more. And I know none of you are lawyers, and I'm a lawyer, but this is, I mean, I can comment on this kind of law, but this is not the kind of law I argue. Although I will say, I have met and gone to dinner with Sarah Weddington, who is the one who argued Roe v. Wade in her 20s, at a time when there was no women's restroom for any of the lawyers who were arguing in front of the Supreme Court. She had to leave and go down a long hallway to another building to be able to use the restroom to be able to argue Roe v. Wade. And I've met her twice, so I can speak to that and the personal part, but if anybody wants to comment on the reasoning of this decision, and not just the reasoning of this decision, because we had a glimpse into it, but of course we don't have the decision, but how many other cases come under that penumbra of privacy rights that were given partly by Griswold, which was the ability to use ability to use birth control, and then also with Roe v. Wade, which addressed abortion, and that those cases don't actually just stand alone. There's a whole lot of rights that are implicated here, and wondered if all of you would want to talk about that and what maybe you're worried about.
But as I've been reading about this and reading about the legal path that was chosen towards drafting that decision, it would reopen so many levels of what's been settled in this country for decades. Things like Brown versus Board of Education, things like Obergefell, right? The law that allowed my sister to marry the woman she loved. I mean, it is so many of these fundamental things. Even I think the interracial marriage law. So it's not, I really feel like it's activism from the Supreme Court to unsettle a whole series of laws that they may or may not be fully aware that they're unsettling, and maybe that's their intent, but it is concerning the doors that it potentially will open for what could be reconsidered.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Melissa just said. It's scary because it starts to make you wonder what the future will hold if we start allowing certain things to happen, when that will end, and kind of dystopian feeling about it, which is really concerning to me. I think about my daughter and what her kind of future is going to look like. Same thing with my son, and just also feeling just concerned about the people who have fought so hard for us to get to this place, for us to have these rights. What an incredible dishonor to those folks who've worked that hard. And, it is concerning. The future of it is very concerning, which is exactly why, though, we need to make sure that we have pro-choice people in office, so that those things are not going to happen, or the places where they are happening, they can be overturned. And so I remain hopeful to that. But that's a collective, we all have to work together to make that happen. And I know that we're all here today to do some of that. And, but, I think that it isn't, I've heard people say, like in Washington State in particular, like, oh, we don't really need to worry about it too much. It's Washington, like we're good. But we can't have that mentality, because it is possible. And the minute we stop thinking it is possible, or the minute we stop thinking it's a problem and that it's not going to happen to us, is when it could actually happen to us. So those are some things that just like motivate to keep the conversations happening, to keep the, megaphone going and regarding to pro-choice and also just reproductive freedoms in general. But, we have to come out and fight again and make it clear that we're not going to be going back in time. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more with what Jessica and Melissa said. I think for me that the biggest fear is that privacy, and it was the underlying argument for the overturning, right? So you've named the big ones, right? Brown versus Board of Education, the Loving decision, the Obergefell, all of those. But really fundamentally, when we start talking about going back to this originalist conception, the women on this call, we weren't originally thought to be voters. The men on this call who weren't landowners were not thought to be voters under the original concept of the Constitution. And certainly as a Black woman, I was not thought to be even a fully formed human, more or less, a citizen with voting rights and power and the privilege of privacy. So that said, it was incredibly scary. But I will say the other Pandora's box potentially to open is around privacy in general. And so last session, I was able to co-sponsor a bill that I think, Melissa, you mentioned it, people saying, or not Melissa, I think Jessica mentioned it, when people just kind of get relaxed, right? And we're in a blue state, no big deal. What's the big deal around privacy? Well, privacy is a big deal. And we just saw with Vice, who did a report that basically for, I think, less than $200 was able to get the geo data and location data on women seeking healthcare in and around abortion facilities and some other data components to just guesstimate that these women may be seeking an abortion. It was a complete weird legal violation of privacy, right? So it was completely legal. They paid their money, they got their data, they got the information they needed, and it was to test. Now imagine if you're doing that to prosecute. So I think as we talk about privacy and that being the underlying factor that no longer exists, it opens up Pandora's boxes in ways that will be absolutely horrific. In what's thought to be the United States, we will become fundamentally individual states and territories with different rights for different people.
I just want to add one. Oh, sorry. Just wanted to add one little quick thing too. I mean, the number one thing to just, when we talk about abortion and what, the legalities and all of that, like at the end of the day, we're not going to stop abortions from happening. They are going to happen, whether they're legal or not. It doesn't matter. They're going to happen. What the difference is, though, is that individuals will not be dying left and right from these not sterile, not good, abortion situations. So if we really care about individuals, if we really care about babies, then we need to be making sure that we have reproductive health care offered to every human being that's out there. Sexual health is health also. So yeah, just want to put that out there.
I just want to echo especially what April just brought up and the concerns around privacy, because that is not what's called enumerated in the Constitution. The word privacy does not appear in the Constitution, but yet many of us really don't like the fact that cameras are on us most everywhere we go around today. Even the IRS had for a while that if you wanted to ask any question or get any copy of your old tax return, you had to use visual identification. Yes, and they did pull back on that. And I actually went through it because I needed to get an older tax return at the time when they had that in place. And to know that there's no other option is very disconcerting. And we are going through a situation where the technology has allowed a lack of privacy like we've never experienced before. So to see that privacy erode at the time when privacy is the most when we're most invaded is just a very it's a very troubling disconnect that I see that we really should be concerned about. So since you're all in the legislature or will be very soon, can you please tell us what can be done in Olympia to help protect reproductive rights, and what can you specifically do?
I will say that Karen actually dropped a key one in the chat. We had a bill last year called the Keep Our Care Act that would have given the Attorney General oversight over hospital mergers. So we have hospitals that do not provide the full range of healthcare, and they continue to take tax dollars as nonprofit entities and operate in ways that don't keep us safe. So giving the Attorney General the ability to provide oversight on a merger that would further extend that lack of care, I think it is the basic role of the Attorney General's office to protect the people of Washington. I mean, I will say that my birth was not great. Like my giving birth to my kiddo. I'd have to ask my mom about my own, but I mean, I had a 3rd-degree tear. Pregnancy and childbirth are hard on bodies. And there's a reason that we measure maternal mortality rates. It's because people are dying all of the time. And the idea that we would not provide the full range of healthcare to every single person who enters every single hospital is really unacceptable to me. So I think one of the number one things we can do is bring back the Keep Our Care Act and pass it.
And I would agree with that as well. And I saw Karen's message in the chat. And I think, and that is one thing that we are very painfully aware of, and we are working very hard so that no matter how these hospitals merge and who they merge with and what their underlying religious belief or tenets are, they still must provide care to each and every person that comes to their door, and be that end of life care, be that reproductive health care, that there is no standard that gets put someone else's lens of morality when you're being treated. And so, so what I will say is legislatively, we've got a lot of amazing folks putting together bills just like the Keep Our Care Act, and we need to get those passed. And that's, again, back to that kind of red, blue, purple conversation we're having tonight. That's why you need all of us there, because we have to work together across the state. Geographic diversity matters a lot to get bills like that passed, because we all know that healthcare doesn't just happen in King County or Snohomish County or Whatcom County. But that said, I will say, you know, what are we going to do? And a lot of what me and my colleagues who are in the legislature right now are looking at is what Connecticut did. And for me, I'm going to be hyper focused this next session on making sure we protect those that provide and also receive abortions. And when I say protect, that our doctors won't be hauled across state lines, they won't be prosecuted, they won't be financially, if there's a civil suit, that we as a state will protect those who are doing basic health care for all people. And so when you look at Connecticut's bill, I think it was HB 5414, and some of the elements there, right? So we're talking about, you know, reimbursement of lawsuit and the costs associated with it, protecting people's medical records, and really placing really strong protections against extradition. I can't believe I'm saying that in 2020 in the United States of America, that we have to have strong extradition protections for our doctors. I mean, I have to take a beat, because that's not a statement we should ever be saying, but we are, and we're taking it seriously. And those will be a couple of the things that we're looking at in the next legislative session.
Yeah, I think, another side of this that, is a big piece of it is there's oftentimes, these hospitals or clinics that are under the guise of being a clinic, but really it's, anti-abortion access type of facilities. Oftentimes they're run by religious, groups, and all of those things just create, a lot of turmoil when it comes to just wanting to make sure that the healthcare is being done in the right way. An example of that is, I'm sure everyone's heard of this, but there was a gal named Allison who actually was experiencing a miscarriage. And unfortunately in Bellingham, and unfortunately she went to one of those types of clinics and started to experience some major issues to the point where actually, her life was in jeopardy. So, because they wasted time trying to convince this woman that it's not a miscarriage, that she should continue to have this pregnancy when it wasn't a viable pregnancy and was putting her life at risk. So these are things that are actually putting people in a very serious position. And I think that needs to be addressed. I think it needs to be addressed in a legal way to hold these places accountable for the kinds of damage that they're causing to these individuals, and to restrict as much as possible from these kinds of groups from popping up and allowing all sorts of malpractices that should not be happening in there. And then just lastly, as we've talked about before, with the disparity of Black and Brown individuals seeking abortion access and just healthcare in general, we need more people that are allies to these communities to be able to be in office, to continue to raise that point up as well. It can't just be on our Black and Brown legislators to constantly be ringing that bell. It needs to be allies as well who are saying we need to make sure that this is part of the language and that it's a big topic at the conversation of how we're going to move forward in, making this a continued accessibility for people. So I think that Washington's done a really great job, though. Last session, we had some great bills come out, and I really, thank you to Representative Berg here and many others that were paramount in putting those things together. And, more than anything, I just am excited to get in those rooms and be part of that conversation and continue that work forward. So, and I know these gals are too. So, yeah.